So, Arthur Schopenhauer. You've probably heard of him, right? The great philosopher of pessimism. But what if I told you that his famously gloomy worldview actually holds a surprisingly practical, maybe even hopeful key for how to get by in our modern world? Let's dig into that.
I mean, have you ever felt like you're just on a treadmill? You chase a goal, maybe a new gadget, a promotion at work. You get it, and for a second it feels great. But then, almost immediately, a new desire just pops into your head. Well, that endless cycle of wanting, that is the problem at the very heart of Schopenhauer's philosophy.
And that brings us to his famous diagnosis of, well, all of us. Schopenhauer said life isn't some steady climb to happiness. Nope, it's more like a pendulum. When it swings one way, that's pain, the feeling of wanting something you don't have. And when you finally get it, it swings to the other side, boredom. That empty, is that all there is feeling? For him, this was the fundamental puzzle he needed to solve. So who was this man who saw the world so differently? You gotta remember, Arthur Schopenhauer lived in a super optimistic time. His big rival, Hegel, saw history as this rational, logical march of progress. Schopenhauer looked at that exact same world and thought, no way. He saw the total opposite, not reason, but a chaotic, irrational force driving everything.
He was born into a wealthy family, set to go into business, but his father's death changed everything. He just dove headfirst into philosophy, and he published his masterpiece when he was only 30 years old. But get this, it was met with deafening silence. Nobody cared. He even tried this bold move of scheduling his lectures at the exact same time as the philosophical superstar Hegel, hoping to steal his audience. It was a complete flop. For decades, his most important work just sat on shelves, and it wasn't until he was an old man that he finally got the recognition he'd been craving.
So, what was this big idea? What did Schopenhauer see that others didn't? His entire philosophy really hinges on this idea that reality is split into two parts. First, you've got the world as representation. This is basically everything we see and touch. The world of objects, all organized by space, time, and cause and effect. But, and this is a huge but, Schopenhauer argued this isn't reality itself. It's more like a projection from our own minds, a veil of Maya that creates the illusion of a world full of separate things.
So what's behind that veil? This is where it gets really wild. Schopenhauer says the true reality is a single, unified force he called the will. And this isn't your personal willpower. No, this is a blind, irrational, endless striving that's in everything. It's the force that makes a plant grow toward the sun, it's the gravity that holds planets in orbit, and it's the relentless desire that drives you and me. And the craziest part is, it has no goal. It just strives.
This comparison really nails the divide. On one side, the world of appearances seems rational, lots of individual things. On the other side, the true reality, one single irrational force. And here's the key. Schopenhauer's big insight was that while we perceive the world as representation, we directly experience it as will. Our own desires, our own strivings, that's our backstage pass to understanding the entire universe.
And this, right here, is why he gets called the philosopher of pessimism. If the universe itself is just endless, aimless wanting, and we're the part of it that's most aware of that wanting, then human life is basically set up to be a cycle of desire, frustration, and fleeting relief. For Schopenhauer, suffering isn't just an accident. It's woven into the very fabric of existence. Okay, I know, it sounds pretty bleak, but hold on. Schopenhauer isn't just a prophet of doom. He actually argues there are ways to escape this cycle. And the first path to finding a little peace? It's through art. So if our own will, this constant wanting inside us, is the source of all our suffering, how do we get away from it? Well, for Schopenhauer, art is the perfect, even if it's just a temporary, escape hatch.
Schopenhauer believed that when you're truly lost in a piece of art, something amazing happens. Your individual desires, your worries, yourself, it all just fades away. You become what he called a pure, will-less subject of knowledge. For a moment, you're not wanting anything, you're just observing. He even had a hierarchy of the arts, from architecture all the way up to tragedy, which he thought revealed the deepest struggles of the will.
But for Schopenhauer, music was in a league of its own. He argued that while other arts copy the ideas of the world, music bypasses all of that and is a direct copy of the will itself. And it kind of makes sense, right? Music is pure striving, tension, and release, with no story attached. It's like we're listening to the sound of reality's inner nature, which is why it can move us so deeply.
So aesthetic contemplation is like a short vacation from the self. But Schopenhauer had a second, more permanent path to peace, and it's found not in beauty, but in ethics.
Schopenhauer was one of the first major Western philosophers to really take Eastern thought seriously, and he found his core ethical idea in the Upanishads, the ancient Hindu scriptures, in this Sanskrit phrase, tat tvam asi. It translates to, thou art that, and it means that the other person, the other living being you see, is fundamentally the same as you.
So this means that real compassion isn't just a feeling, it's a deep, metaphysical insight. It's realizing that the separation between me and you is just an illusion, part of that veil of Maya. Since we're all just expressions of that one will, to harm someone else is, literally, to harm yourself. This is the foundation of all true morality, which, if taken to its extreme, leads to asceticism, a complete denial of the self and its desires.
So, you might think this gloomy philosophy would just fade away, but you would be totally wrong. Schopenhauer's influence was massive, and it reached some very unexpected places. What's really fascinating is the huge gap between the philosophy and the man himself. He preached compassion but was famously irritable, and even pushed a neighbor down a flight of stairs in an argument. He wrote about renouncing the ego, but was notoriously vain. And in maybe the greatest contradiction of all, this prophet of asceticism absolutely adored his poodles, even naming one Atman, the Sanskrit word for the universal soul. His influence on later thinkers was just staggering. Nietzsche took the will and turned it into his will to power. Wagner's operas are basically Schopenhauer set to music. Freud's concept of the unconscious id is pretty much a psychological version of the blind, irrational will. The list just goes on and on. Tolstoy, Proust, and even incredibly Erwin Schrödinger, one of the founders of quantum mechanics. And that brings us to the famous last lines of his masterpiece. When he says the world becomes nothing, he isn't talking about some void of despair. For Schopenhauer, this nothingness is the ultimate peace. It's that state of pure quiet that happens when the endless striving will is finally silenced. It's like the silence after the music stops. Which really leaves us with a big question for our time. We live in a world that's basically designed to constantly create new desires. It's a perfect engine for the will. So Schopenhauer's challenge to us is to wonder, is it possible that real freedom is found not in satisfying our every impulse, but in learning to quiet them altogether?